Welcome to the HR Empowerment Podcast, where we will uncover strategies and new insights from HR professionals who discuss up-to-date regulations, best practices, and the most pressing topics like diversity and equity, leadership, dealing with difficult situations, and much more that affect your bottom line and business. Thanks for joining us.
Hey everybody, Wendy Sellers here, the HR lady. Welcome back to session 4 of 5 of our podcast. We have a special guest here, Andrew Swiler. Hey Andrew, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Wendy. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, talk to us a little bit more about, what your day-to-day looks like and how you help people not lose their sanity.
My day-to-day, it's funny because, people come to us and they're like, because our company's been around for 12 years. So, the company has a lot of HR knowledge internally, but our company operates so much differently from our clients because our clients come to us and they have 500 to 5,000 employees. They're these big complex companies and they need all these special workflows. We're 25 people that live in 12 countries.
Wow.
We have no offices. We all work in the hours that we want to work. Right now it's almost midnight for me and I'm, here talking to you and I'm still working. So we have a very remote, we are fully remote. We are asynchronous. We do work, we cross over on hours, but our day to day is very different than most of our clients and most companies that are out there. But we're trying to be as agile as possible. And the reason that we're like this is because, at least I personally found, hiring people in this type of environment is much easier. We just look for the best people we can find, no matter where they are, no matter what they can do, as long as they can speak English and they can communicate well, and they're willing to work and learn. We're totally open to it, which is why, we have people in the US, we have people in India, we have people in Ukraine, we have people in Western Europe. We have people all over the place. So my day-to-day is a little bit different from a normal HR person, but what we find is, talking to a lot of our clients and sort of how their day-to-day is, one of the most difficult things for them is just keeping up with the documentation and keeping up with the constant barrage of information that's coming at them from the different departments. Because HR, the one interesting thing about HR and especially HR software is it touches all the people in the company, which very few other groups in the company can say. Other than really the CEO, accounting doesn't even get to see some parts of certain companies. So it's ubiquitous in a company, and it's the one piece of software that everyone's using, no matter what. Because even if they're just using it once a week to, for time and attendance or for their weekly check-in or a weekly employee survey, it's the one piece of software that everyone's using.
Well, I have a question here. There's some statistics out there. I'm looking at one right now. It says 36% of HR professionals believe they lack suitable technology, which I know we're talking about here. I want to take that even a next step further. They probably lack the technology skills as well. So we're talking about, moving everybody to software. By everybody, I mean HR people, but then also the employees who need to talk to the HR people, need to submit a vacation request or an address change. How do we get our HR folks, first of all, technology savvy? And then second of all, if we're going to be relying on technology, how do we handle the folks that work for us that their job doesn't involve technology and they don't have computer skills?
Yeah, it's always a challenge. One of our biggest, so when we do an implementation of our software, we cut out a chunk of the time budget just to training. And what I was saying before is the difficult part about training is that when you have like the person that's going to kind of be the focal point of this product, they're very engaged and they want to be a part of it. But anyone that's sort of like an ancillary part of it, like that are just sort of listening to the training, it's like, well, I'm just going to use like the time and attendance. Like, I don't really care.
Right.
Their eyes glaze over. And until, the hardest part about training people is until they're hands on and they get in there, they don't really know how it works. And so you have to encourage them to like break things almost, to say like, hey, so what we do, we set up test environments for companies. We say, okay, we'll copy your data, we'll put it into this test environment and you guys can use it for the next month and sort of play around with it. And don't worry, it's not going to break the actual production environment. And that gives them a little bit more confidence afterwards. But from what we found, we invest a lot into support because we find that people that do get their hands dirty, which we encourage, break things a lot or, things go wrong. So we always try and make sure that there's some support people involved that can kind of step in and fix any of those issues quickly.
$1 million question for you here is going to make sense to some, but I'll also break it down a little bit simpler too. So in your world, if you're playing around with coding stuff and, you know, you're scripting via Python and REST API and doing some crazy funky stuff there from the end user perspective, is there an advantage to having the software look and feel a certain way or modeled after a certain end user experience or certain like office style type product that they're used to using? Or is it more advantageous to create your own realm and your own world and have it written in maybe a language that's still a little bit more globally universal from an open source perspective, but now the interface isn't so integrated in a way? Do you delineate on the user experience and the way it looks and feels?
So we actually, our software is pretty unique in the sense that it's built with Microsoft SharePoint. So it's integrated into Microsoft SharePoint. So Microsoft SharePoint is a look and feel. I mean, there are people that are listening to this probably that don't use Microsoft SharePoint. They have no idea what we're talking about. It's a strange product. But when you get used to it, you're used to that look and feel, the way it works, the way it interacts. And our product, so it looks native to that. So they're used to like, hey, they go from their Office 365 and SharePoint, they go to our technology. It looks the same. They know where the buttons are. They know how it works. It always looks the same to them. But one of the bigger issues that we found, and I'll go even a step further than that, is that when companies do try and do this complex UX and UI, sometimes it's not very intuitive for people. And a lot of this like new age thinking of like how UX and UI, and it's simpler because they're taking it from like the best in class, like Facebook is one of the best companies at designing things. But unless you have the designers from Facebook, what you're actually designing doesn't actually work like Facebook because they have 1,000 designers that are designing the best piece of software ever made to make it as easy as possible for people to use it. Now, beyond that, another huge issue that happens is, so personally, we have a product that's like monolithic. So it touches all parts of HRMS and you pretty much can do like a one-stop shop. I do know a lot of very good software companies that just focus on one thing. They're just an ATS or they're just employee engagement. They're just OKRs and they do it fantastic. And their product, frankly, their one thing is better than our whole thing. Like their one thing is fantastic. The issue is it doesn't communicate well with the other pieces of software everyone has to use. And the issue is when somebody in accounting, needs to do their time and attendance, they got to open this app. And then when they need to do their employee engagement survey, they need to open the other app. And then they have to remember this log and they have to remember this thing. And nobody remember. And then they forget the workflow. They forget, like, what do I have to open to do the one-on-one note taking I was supposed to be doing? Yeah. And they can't remember. So we get a lot of our clients are because they've kind of gone through that system and now they're like 3,000 people and they just say like, you know what, we just want one logo that everyone knows. I click on Lanteria and that does the stuff that we needed to do. Right. And we skip over that complexity, but it's difficult because some of these softwares are really good.
So I want to tie it real quick into the employee engagement and throw it back to you, Andy, on the backside of this too. When we think about a company that's been around a long time and it has maybe some of that bad data, or they're going to be working with you on a data conversion, and we reach into the true Wayback Train, all the way to 1988, and now we've got that AS400 system and some of that data that we've migrated 7 times, and we got to do it one more time to meet the benchmark. These are series of standards that impact employee engagement at the end of the day. If your people are tied up doing the data conversions and you've got all this bad data, it's going to impact. You got to draw a line, right, Andrew? You got to draw a line and move forward. And Wendy, where do you draw that line between moving forward and preserving the history of your organization?
Yeah, I think
that's to both of you anyway.
I think it's going to be different for every company. It just depends. If you're in fast growth mode, that maybe it's only 6-8 months and you can get that data, but you might also not have time and there's no way you're going to get this data because people have already come and gone and it doesn't matter why.
It's irrelevant.
Exactly. So there's been many times with companies, even just doing employee surveys and stuff, that I'm like, we're going to draw a line in the sand right now. And then you have to, listeners, you have to educate your C-suite who's getting this reports to say, hey, when it's comparing 2020 to 2021 or 2023 to 2024, remember in 2023, we had no data. So it's going to look really like we're doing really good or that we're doing really bad, but we really don't have anything to compare it about. Again, so I always create template forms and put a giant reminder on the top. Remember, any data from, before 2019 is not accurate, but this is just here for historical purposes. So you're going to have to work with an expert like Andrew to say, all right, based on your industry and your growth patterns or your turnover patterns, this is where we stop collecting data and stop wasting our time, and let's move forward. Fair enough?
It's an interesting question. Honestly, I would be interested to know people from the audience, so how often they do go back and how far they go back and what is relevant. Frankly, I don't know. I mean, I know our clients typically, everyone's working in 4 or 5 year cycles. And beyond that 4 or 5 year cycle, it's very hard to gauge. And I think now business has changed so quickly. Nothing is relevant. 2019 isn't relevant to any data today.
It's fascinating.
I don't know. It's hard. It is fascinating. Really is. From an investor perspective, when you look at investors, they always say, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. So it could be interesting to look back on some of that data from 1998 and say, how is it relevant to, the macro situation going on now? But that's a really tough question. I honestly don't have an answer to that.
It really is. I don't think any of us have answers to that, because it's the reason I always ask, I always say, why? What do you need it for? That's and so once what do you need it for?
Yeah.
The magical why. What do you need it for? And then we can get you the information for that, versus spending hours and hours and hours of money to build data that you only needed for this one piece. So Thank you, JC, for that. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll be right back with our final episode of this 5-part series on harnessing HR software to supercharge your HR department.
Thank you for joining the HR Empowerment Podcast, brought to you by Aurora Training Advantage. We hope you've gained new insight and strategies to navigate the HR profession. We look forward to you joining us again on the HR Empowerment Podcast.